Hi, this is Johnny MaK, and welcome to Live Mixing Concepts Episode 2. Today, we will be talking about the importance of gates. What is a gate? A gate allows audio to pass through when a defined threshold is met. Anything that doesn't meet the threshold leaves the gate closed. Anything that passes it will open the gate. Gates are just another tool in our toolbox that can be used to give us more control over what we are hearing. Primarily, they are used on drums, though not exclusively, but that is where we're going to focus on today. Gates give us control in 3 different ways. They reduce microphone bleed, they shape the length of the drum, and they help us remove feedback. Let's go into number 1, reducing microphone bleed. It is simply referring to something, in our case noise, bleeding into where we don't want it. For instance, if we look at a tom microphone, there's a lot of information in there that isn't the sound of the drum. We can hear cymbals, we can hear the kick drum, and we can hear the snare drum. We don't really care about anything else other than the tom hits, so our gate is going to allow us to reduce all of that other information and leave us with what we care about. Let's take a look at our gate. As we adjust the threshold, we can set it to where the tom hits can easily open the gate and remove everything else entirely. We suddenly have much more focus and control over our tom microphone, but it doesn't sound that natural. This leads us nicely into our second point. Shaping the drum. We have adjusted our threshold, so now we can look at our next controls. These are the attack, hold, and release. The attack decides how long it takes for the gate to open, the hold dictates how long the gate stays open for, and the sustain tells us how long it's going to take for the gate to close. Here is the sound of a tom. And here you can visually see the tom hit in 3 separate parts. Here is the initial transient of the stick hitting the drum. Here is the meat of the drum, and then the tail of the drum. In an ideal world, you will just be setting your hold and release settings to capture the natural sound of the drum and reduce the sound of everything else around it. But we hardly live in ideal situations. A lot of the time, we come across drummers who don't know how to hit their drums properly, or just refuse to learn how to tune their drums. This can result in a drum having a really long sustain and just being an absolute ringing mess. We can use the hold and release times to our benefit and shape the sound of the drum to bring back some control. Now for our third benefit of gates. Reducing feedback. As a basic principle in live sound, every microphone that you add to your stage reduces how much gain or volume you can add before feedback. Realistically, we want to capture as many sources as possible while still retaining control. They essentially act like removing microphones on the stage by reducing their volume when they aren't needed and only opening when we want them to. Now, occasionally you will run into an issue where a gate opens and catches the sound of the PA. This can, in turn, cause some low frequency feedback. Here you can see my somewhat faked version of this. Instinctively, as live sound engineers, we are programmed to EQ feedback away, but in doing so, we change the sound of the drum and we may want to retain that low end. That is where this little section of the gate comes into play. This is the sidechain filter, also referred to as a key. By default, your gate is listening to the whole frequency range, and anything that breaks that threshold will open the gate. But your sidechain filter lets you dictate which frequencies the gate listens to. With your sidechain filter, you can tell your gate to ignore the low frequencies, so it doesn't matter how much low frequency buildup you get, the gate will still close. If we bring up our image of the tom again, we can listen to the initial stick hit and see that it fits between the range of 200 Hz and 10 kHz. If we set our sidechain filter to these frequencies, then our gates will open when the drum is struck, and we can adjust our release time to allow the low end to smoothly tail out and ignore any buildup. Now that we understand most of our adjustments, we can keep looking at things sounding a bit more natural. We know how to set the hold and release time to keep the drum intact, and we know how to focus our frequencies. but our drums are still sounding manipulated, and in reality, a drummer is occasionally going to hit the drum softer than the threshold will allow through. So now we can use the depth of our gate to keep some of that intact. Rather than our gate completely removing everything under the threshold, it is simply turning it down. If you're in a smaller room, the sound from your stage will probably make up for most of this lost information. But as you start to mix larger shows, your adjustments start to become more apparent and you need to be more mindful of them. I personally set my gates anywhere between -8 to -4 dB of reduction, but your mileage may vary. Here are a few moments before and after using gates, and I will also kill the overheads so that we are only listening to the direct microphones. As you can hear, everything sounds pretty natural, and I'm going to drop my depth on all of my gates all the way down so that you can hear how the mix starts to fall apart. So for me, when we start pulling back the depth, or in this case the range, the drums start to feel unnatural. You lose a lot of the tail and the low end that builds up in that tail. So for instance in the kick drum you hear it especially. If we use one tool really aggressively, we end up with something that sounds unnatural and not very pleasing to the ear. So that wraps up episode 2. And thank you to the people who have subscribed and given me some great positive feedback. It has been absolutely overwhelming. So if you could hit like and subscribe to this if you enjoyed the video, it really helps motivate me. Thanks. Goodbye.